I am done. I am done competing in mixed martial arts.
Now, nobody knows better than you the regard that I have for this legendary midget.
The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be.
Numerous conversations about who the greatest of all time is. Could you remind the audience who we consider those four to be, just to make sure we're on the same page?
Yeah, those four should be John Jones, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, and of course, Demetrius Johnson.
Fuck you! Is that all?
Gee, let me think.
Hell no! No!
My wife?
Is there a strong case that DJ has retired as the best to ever do it?
Okay, let's go.
I think that Mighty Mouse has the same level of somebody arguing him being number one as any of those other three do. He's got more title defenses than all of them, more consecutively. He's super well-rounded. He's done it in 2 organizations. And even when they try to test him by handicapping him in a match against somebody who specializes in a particular discipline, he still won that fight. So he has all of the accolades. He checks all of the boxes to be in that conversation. And if somebody, most of the time you, were to say that he is number one, I really can't argue it. You know, I can only throw, certain arguments about the other 3 out there, and it just depends on what day of the week it is.
I beg to differ, sir.
I'm going to go on a massive glaze here. And to be fair, I mean, my GOAT mountain is interchangeable aside from number one spot. DJ's always remained at the top of my list. So I figure the best way to kind of frame this is to maybe talk about some of the others very briefly to kind of give you an idea of where my head's at. So obviously my number 2 is John Jones, and I feel like that's difficult for me at times.
Why?
Obviously we know that he's a repeated roid abuser. He does have massive scalps on his record that at the time seemed like great wins, but have kind of aged like milk. I mean, if you look through it,
This is number one bullshit.
the best win of his career you could probably say was DC, and that was overturned. Probably should have gone down as a retrospective DQ. In any other sport, it would have gone down as a loss. If you go in there and cheat, you're not getting a no contest, and you get to maintain your relatively undefeated record. He spent the majority of his career beating fighters that he has considerable advantages over, all that went on to completely fall off. So he went 5 with Smith. He had a split against Thiago, who shattered his leg in the first round. He arguably lost to Reyes. And he's fought once in 4 years. Now, GSP, for hardcores, you kind of know that GSP has one of the strongest cases in terms of CV. Like, he's beat Matt Hughes twice, BJ Penn twice, Koscheck twice. He beat Sarah, he beat John Fitch, who's a nightmare. Shields, Condit, Diaz, a murderer's row of contenders. I will argue that maybe the rematches somewhat maybe dampen his legacy, because it doesn't help when you look through somebody's record and they fought the same person twice. You can also argue that he lost to Johnny Hendricks.
You don't say! He ain't lying.
And even though he did win a middleweight belt, no disrespect to Bisping, he might be one of the weakest middleweight champions of all time.
That's all!
And I love Michael Bisping, but he was a journeyman. And then he dipped when things got difficult. So he left when the going got tough. Now, if you look at Anderson Silva, his run at middleweight was maybe one of the best runs in, if not the run in MMA history. And again, it's a hardcore thing. 17 fight win streak, beating names like Dan Henderson, Rich Franklin, who I think is one of the most underrated guys in the sport. Obviously, Damian Maia, Belfort, Sonnen, etc. Now, he didn't lose his belt until his late 30s. I think he'd be undeniable if he retired right then. I do think the 2 submission losses earlier on in his career to Chonen and to Cassie They kind of highlighted some weakness there that he did overcome, but they stand as kind of potential holes in his game if they'd been exploited. And then obviously losing 7 in 8 to close out his career kind of speaks for itself. Now again, if you look at Demetrius Johnson, comparing them to those three, he had the longest title run in UFC history, which you mentioned. People sometimes complain about his CV being an issue compared to the other esteemed greatest.
Bullshit?
But I disagree with that. I mean, he beat a prime Benavidez, who was absolutely mustard twice, and beat him even better the second time. He beat Ian McCall, who, if he didn't have the injuries he had in his career, was an amazing fighter. Some wins have aged really well as well, so like John Dodson really aged well. Horiguchi, who's still at the top of the sport and somebody that you hold in very high regard.
For sure.
He submitted him with a second to go in that fight, and one of the most impressive submission finishes. He knocked out Henry Cejudo in 3 minutes. He beats Tim Elliott, who's a very tricky veteran, who's still operating now, Ray Borg. So I'm saying his CV gets the kind of abuse that it shouldn't. And I think if flyweight was better promoted, we wouldn't have this issue. But during that title run, the range of wins that he had was insane. He went from dominant decisions to KOs by punches, knees, and kicks. He has flashy subs like arm bars, kimuras, guillotines. He has them all on his record in title defenses. Alright, he lost to Henry Cejudo. Most people agree that that was a bad decision at best. I don't think it was a robbery, I just think it was a bad decision. And after being pushed out of the promotion, he goes to 1 deep into his 30s. He then goes on a murderer's spree run in that one, again, which you mentioned, including a pit stop to beat Rod Tang in a mixed round Muay Thai MMA match. And he lets him do his Muay Thai round first, which if you see that guy, that's not somebody you want to fuck with in that domain. And he held his own. He then goes on to lose to Moraes, who is a massive bantamweight, by a knee to the face, which he admitted afterwards he didn't understand were in the rules. He comes back and then beats him using the same move. He beats him the way that he got beaten, in an even more impressive way. Then he wins the rubber match, dominating him over 5. This man is turning up at BJJ tournaments at 37, 38 years old against men twice his size and submitting them. He's never popped. He's learned from his losses. He's had the longest title run in UFC history. Has 2 titles at the 2 biggest organizations in the sport. And he's won world-class events at singular disciplines against Goliath motherfuckers. Goes out at the top of the sport. For me, when you consider all these things and you try to compare them to anybody else, it's fucking undeniable.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
The man is the greatest in terms of the quality of wins, the way that he wins, the longevity, the way that he's done it clean. For me, he's undeniable as the greatest. And he's a fucking nice lad as well.
If I don't make it, tell my story to my wife, okay?
To throw it in there as well. For me, he's undeniably the best to ever do it.
You know, the other people in that top 4, they do have their holes in their argument, you know, being, you know, popped for this or that, you know, when it comes to Jones and Silva. And then you got GSP, who basically just stopped finishing people. He's 60% of his wins in the UFC are by decision. So he wasn't as dominant. He was winning, but he wasn't as dominant. So there's arguments against, you can find an argument against any of them if you want to, but DJ probably has the least amount of arguments that you could find to bring up to rebut him being number 1.
The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be.